I wasn't in a typical teaching situation in that I was hired by a Canadian married couple who had just acquired a conversation school. So many of the perks and amenities of being hired by a large ikaiwa were missing. I needed to find my own housing in a fairly rural location. So when I came across a large house owned by a Canadian who rented to foreigners, I just had to take it. Among the many charms and quirks of the house were also a few unusual things, none of which were evident upon my initial visit to the house. There were a lot of items left behind by previous inhabitants at different points in the course of the house being offered as a rental. This gave the house a sense of confused time. There were clothes, magazines, and other artifacts from as long ago as the 80s and as recently as the tenant before me, by my estimate. The house carried noises from the neighbors on either side of it as each house was connected. I once thought someone was coming tearing down the stairs toward me in the middle of the night, only to discover that my neighbor never removed the work boots. He stomped around his own house on the other side of me. A cat meowed itself to hoarseness before seeming to have become mute. In this setting, I also began to feel a sense of unease about the house. The creepiest feeling room was the one I chose to sleep in, as it was the only room with internet access. I figured if anything weird happened, I could at least make a call to someone about it. Although there were a few noises that came from upstairs at night that seemed pretty unexplainable, by far the strangest thing wasn't what the house did while I was there, but how I began to behave during my time there. To start, I began to forget to eat. I don't know how else to explain it. I had to travel a few train stops away to get groceries, which was sometimes inconvenient, but my lack of interest went beyond the occasional neglect to cook up eggs or rice on my days off. Eating became something I did out of panic after long hours of skipping meals or forgetting dinner. I lost 35 pounds in a very short amount of time, causing my bosses to express concern. I didn't know how to explain it, and I did my best to remember, but it wasn't consistent. I was constantly anxious in the house. In part, this must have been due to my extreme isolation, as I ran the school without coworkers and rarely spoke to anyone in person beyond my students and the school manager. However, it made me feel crazy. I was constantly feeling out of control and nervous in general. Then there were my sleep disturbances. I suffered from insomnia for the first month or so, cramming myself into a love seat in the living room and cycling through Ghibli movies all night. Many times I saw the sun rise before I could sleep at all. Once I finally settled enough to sleep in a room, I couldn't bring myself to sleep upstairs at all, and chose the bedroom adjacent to the living room. At first, I slept on a futon on a platform bed frame. When summer came, I often kept the sliding glass door in the room open and slept on the futon on the floor. Then I stopped using the futon and slept on just the floor on top of a blanket. I wasn't uncomfortable or experiencing any sort of back pain, so I can't explain why I stopped sleeping on any sort of bed. By the time I left Nara, I was very thin, sleeping on a blanket on the floor without a pillow by choice. When the caretaker of the house came to do an inspection walkthrough with me before I moved out, he said about the room I had been staying in, "Boy, this room is really creepy, isn't it?" I asked him to tell me what had happened there, both excited and terrified that I wasn't alone in feeling something was absolutely wrong about the room. But he wouldn't tell me what he knew and wouldn't look me in the eye as he refused. If this situation could be plausibly explained as a mental health crisis, I believe I would have taken some time to recover or bounce back to a sense of normalcy. Nevertheless, my appetite was restored almost immediately upon vacating the house. I was able to sleep again, in a bed with pillows. I gained weight. I felt like myself again within weeks. I've learned a lot about Japanese folklore since that experience in Nara, but I'm never one to assume I have enough knowledge to set a definitive label on what happened in the house. All I know is that I've never experienced anything like it before or since. I've been living in the Japan countryside for nearly 3 months. Instead of staying in a traditional apartment, I was able to rent a small home in an area where neighbors were scattered, somewhat far apart. Each night I slept very well, but one night I had an unexpected presence visit me. I could sense him at the foot of my bed, the Yuri. A human ghost walking the earth had entered my home. I used to be afraid of ghosts, but there was something about Japan that made spirits almost seem second nature to me. The Yurei spoke to me in Japanese. "What would you wish of me?" I paused for a moment, remembering that wishes from the spirit world are never what they are cracked up to be. So I instead responded, "May I serve you a cup of tea?" After a brief moment of silence, the Yurei began to walk out of my room, and I followed him into the kitchen area where there were 3 chairs and a table. I turned toward the Yurei as I entered the kitchen. "Since it is rather late in the evening, I will serve you hujisha." I then began preparing the hot water on the stove. Hujisha is a very light-baked tea leaf that has minimal caffeine and is a popular tea for the evening. I hoped it would be acceptable to the Yurei guest. I could feel the Yurei watching me make the tea as he sat in the chair farthest from the kitchen, closer to the bedroom. I brought my small green tea set out, filled it with the now piping hot boiled water, and added the tea leaves. I set the tea on the table and began to serve my ghostly guest. The Yurei politely took the tea and began to drink. "What would you wish of me?" he began again. I thought for a moment and decided it would be better for me to treat the Yurei as a guest and play the part of the gracious hostess, rather than truly answer what my wish would be. "Are you a guest in my house? I could not make a wish from a guest in my house. What would you wish of me as my guest?" The Yurei paused for a short moment and then asked me, "Will you come with me to the forest?" I was taken aback by the question, and finally my fear began to kick in. I was fearful what would await me on the way to the forest or even in the forest itself. Still being the polite hostess, I answered him, "Well, you see, it is late now. I would have no protection against the things that wander in the night. I am afraid that the outside night can be a little scary for me alone." This somehow seemed to make the Yurei sit upright, as though he were surprised. He then smiled at me and said, "Well then, in gratitude to my hostess, I will grant you that wish. You will have protection in the night from this night forward." A little frightened and worried, since I did not intend that to come across as a wish. I thanked the Yurei for his thoughtfulness, but insisted he did not need to be so generous since he was a guest. What he said next, though, truly caught my curiosity. "There are children of the wilderness that I know well. They will always watch after you, in the night or in the day. They can sense when you need them. This is not my gift to you, but their gift to you. I am as a father to them." My curiosity overcame my fear, and after finishing our tea, I grabbed my coat and accompanied the Yurei outside. We walked a short ways, and suddenly I felt a shiver of cold overwhelm me. The fear tingled all the way through my spine and made me want to run back to the house as quickly as possible. Suddenly, I was approached by a fox-like animal that was a little taller than my knees. Surprised by being approached for the first time by a wild animal of this size, I stopped for a moment. The fox seemed unafraid of me and looked right into my eyes. I turned toward the Yurei and he slightly bowed his head at me, as though telling me the fox was his. I continued to walk, and the fox walked alongside me. We were nearing the forest, and I began to fear again what awaited me within the shadows of the trees. In that moment, 2 tanuki that looked like raccoons approached me. I began to realize these must be the children of the wilderness of which the Yurei spoke. I felt less alone with the tanuki and fox on either side of me and continued into the forest. It was pitch black as I entered. It was like walking into a dense fog or mist without seeing anything in front of me. Anyone with instincts would think to turn away from darkness like this, but somehow I felt safe and unafraid. There was a small glowing object deep into the forest. The Yurei was clearly walking towards it. The animals clamored next to my legs, stopping me from walking for a moment. I could not tell why until I took another step and noticed the ground was much lower and I would have tripped and fallen. Walking at pace with the Yurei, the glowing object became larger as I approached it. Finally, I reached it and could see that it was a small shrine with fireflies floating around it. Atop the shrine was a small, chipped teacup, similar to the ones I had just served at my table. The Yurei turned towards me. "Do you remember when you came here?" the Yurei asked. "I have not been here before," I answered in a low voice, almost speaking to myself. "You came here once before and offered me tea, yet you did not make a wish. I would like to hear your wish." Unsure how a teacup similar to mine made it all the way out into the forest, I decided to inspect it. I picked up the teacup and suddenly felt a chill down my spine. I could see that the teacup perfectly matched the ones in my set, yet I was sure I was not missing any cups. I don't understand how this got here. I don't even remember leaving it here. I continued to inspect the teacup. When did this get here? You brought it to me when you were alive, but I was unable to ask your wish before your death. The air escaped my body just as the teacup crashed against the shrine after my hands lost their grip. I stared into the Yurei's face in utter disbelief and raced back to the house, shaking and frightened at the impossible idea of my being a ghost. I raced inside the house only to find myself lying on the kitchen floor with the tea leaves and cold water scattered on the ground. This set of experiences was during my time in Okinawa from 2009 to 2011. I was stationed there on Kadena Air Base and lived in an on-base dormitory. There were 3 major occurrences while I stayed in that room. The first of the 3 was the least jarring. My room was occupied by a pair of young men who'd passed presumably during the U.S. occupation way back. They never really bothered anything as they tended to just mill about the small room. At night, they usually settled into the chair by the window and on the foot of the bed. Never really felt anything negative from them, just felt like company. The next one, however, there was a woman who would wander the dorm. Usually she came to drunks and gave them pleasant dreams for the sake of keeping it PG. One evening, I'd had a bit of alcohol myself, but no more than enough to be tipsy. I felt soft, feminine hands running down my back, a feeling I've had before years prior that like then I rebuffed. Apparently, she didn't take kindly to my dismissal as after that, she appeared more frequently. I would be playing games on my laptop and my room would chill noticeably during the summer. It couldn't have been the AC since that came from the inner hallway. It was sometime after her visitations that another spirit started coming around. I tie these two together due to them almost always appearing together and from what a friend told me later. This presence was another male. Both him and the woman were native spirits. He would appear around the same time as her and they would stand opposite one another. His presence was accompanied by the air feeling much hotter than before. I'd end up half hot and half cold in the middle of their stare down. One evening, I lay down to sleep for the night. Shortly after I laid down, I found I couldn't move. I felt a large, rough hand on my head and another on my side before hearing the sheets creak as I was pressed into the bed. Of course, I panicked mentally and started muttering in my head, "Get out," and trying to shake myself. It took some time before I wiggled slightly and uttered G. As soon as I said the phrase aloud, I was able to move freely and sprung out of bed. At this time, the light was on, but there were seething shadows where the ceiling met the walls. I could actually see them writhing like small tentacles outward. There was an overwhelming presence bearing down on me, so I contacted a friend of mine I'd just been speaking to on TeamSpeak. She came on and I explained the situation. She strongly advised that I did a banishing ritual to get rid of the offending spirit, or that she could. Not wanting to make things worse by messing any part of it up, I asked her to do so. She said to put her on the speakers, and she read the words. No sooner did she finish than she disconnected abruptly mid-sentence as things calmed on my end. When she came back, a woman's voice screamed from behind her own. She said she'd dealt with the spirit, although it had made an attempt at her. That was when she explained what she'd gotten from the spirit. The woman in life had gotten involved with the wrong people and then the wrong forces. They owned her, as she put it, and she came that night to get me for scorning her. The man that I had kicked out, she mentioned him without prior knowledge, had come to protect me from her. He had taken his own life because of her and became bound to her and the earth by custom. I spoke to the man, apologizing for shunting him out as I had in panic. I thanked him for trying to protect me and said that I would honor his passing. As I finished speaking, 3 lights blinked in the air over my bed, the shape of a triangle, first the top point, then down to the right, and lastly across to the left. After that night, I never saw nor felt either of them again. Speaking with my mother, she told me that the lights were his acceptance of the apology, his thanks for my honoring him, and his goodbye as he moved on. The last one certainly startled me, but was altogether peaceful. I'm not sure if the two happening were connected, but they may have been. I was driving back to the dorm from the flight line that night when I saw a shadow blot out my back passenger window. It crept up toward the front passenger window before latching onto the side mirror. I couldn't see so much as I knew that it was swirling in around that window before it slid off entirely. That night in the early morning, I'd woken up with the feeling that I was being watched. As soon as I opened my eyes, I was met with the wide eyes of a small local girl staring unblinking into my own. I started with a jump before I felt she was harmless. I shook my head and told her that she could stay as long as she didn't watch me sleep anymore. She wandered away to look around the room as I fell back asleep. Later on, I always kept a bucket next to my computer chair as a small table. I didn't use it as a table then because a small part of me said not to. So as I was playing my game, waiting for a call from my mother, I'd feel something gently graze my leg at a steady rhythm. When she called during our talking, she'd ask me who my friend was. I was confused for a moment before she said, "The little girl sitting next to you." She also said she enjoyed watching me play my games. She told me that she'd gone blind and passed away due to an old childhood illness a ways back. She'd been drawn to me as, whatever it might have been, I was the first person she'd seen in ages. After that, I'd more frequently leave the bucket uncluttered while I played games or explained when I couldn't. My other 2 members of the room that I mentioned were unbothered by her, so I didn't mind her either. So it was me and 3 spirits in that small room. As I was writing these out, I recalled a couple details. My friend had said that the woman had guided something into the room that night and it had left before I'd gotten her help. The other was that my 2 resident spirits from prior were nowhere to be found during the incident. Not that I suspect them to have helped, nor expected them to, just a curiosity. I now live in a 2-storied farmhouse located in a countryside. I have a chicken coop in my backyard and recently paired 2 white Chinese silk chicken, and they have 6 chicks and are all healthy. I thought my slow life had just begun until I found that there is a creepy closet at the attic. The story began in a stormy night. I was alone in my house with my cat, Alishini. Alishini is a playful gray female cat with short hair and a pair of beautiful green eyes. She liked to hide in the old closet in the attic and plays hide and seek. I was creeped by the closet since the first day I saw it in my attic. Usually I will just bait out Alishan using her favorite toy, Mr. Rat, and just carry her away from the closet. I never used that closet until today. During that stormy night, Alishini again was playing hide and seek, and same as usual, she hid in the closet. I was tired with the routine of having to bait her out of the closet and carrying her away. So this time I decided just to wait for her to come out. Alishini popped her little head out of the slightly open closet and looked at me, doing that face of, "Why are you not doing your routine?" I baited her from the old sofa with Mr. Rat and planned to hug her when she reached the toy. As expected, Alishini came running, but then she stopped as if someone else beside me was there. I looked around and thought that my back is getting cold. Alishini walked towards me with caution and was staring on the wall behind me as if someone is standing behind me. I turned around and saw nothing but a wall, obviously. Alishini walked back and ran to my bed. I was creeped out, so I followed Alishini to my bed, thinking to sleep the night away. In the middle of the night, I hear some noise in the backyard and thought that some wild raccoon might have sneaked in the chicken coop. I ran out into the yard with my spring-loaded air rifle and switched on the light of the chicken coop. The hen was sitting on her nest, protecting the fluffy chicks. The male was on top of the roof alert, staring down at me curiously. I saw no trace of raccoons or whatsoever. I switched off the light and turned my back at the closed door of the chicken coop. I suddenly feel that my back is cold again, as if the rainwater has dripped onto my back. I looked back and obviously just saw the orange door of the chicken coop in the dark, but nothing else. I set up my air rifle and turned on the laser aimer on the way back to my house, just in case there is some beast hiding somewhere. I kept feeling that someone is looking at me from the distance. I hurried back in the house and saw that Alishane was awake. She was peeking up the stairs to the attic. I immediately thought of that creepy closet. I put my gun back from where it should be, so that I will not shoot Alishani or anything in the house accidentally. I switched on the lights and headed to the attic. Alishani was curious on my actions and looked at me with her ears straight up. The attic was quiet and dark since it is used as a storage. I could only hear the rainwater dripping outside the window. I see the closet from the reflections of the lights downstairs. I softly opened the closet with my The closet slammed shut by itself suddenly. I carried Alishani as I ran out and went straight to my garage. Poor Alishani was so frightened that she curled up in my arms like a fur ball. I think it was the first time in my life that I have ever ran away from a closet. Till today, the closet is still on the same spot at the attic of my house. My first experience was when I went to Japan for a family visit over the summer. It's been a long time since I visited them. I was only 15, and that's when it happened. Before I went to Japan, some of my friends would tell me ghost stories about Japan. I thought they were just teasing me, so I ignored them. When I arrived, it was going well. The first week of my stay in Japan was going very fine, but I felt as though a shadow was following me. I kept having this feeling like someone had been watching me for a while. One time I woke up in the middle of the night and I was still sleepy. I don't even know why I decided to get up, but when I looked over to my shadow, I found another shadow behind my shadow. I quickly turned around, but no one was there. First, I was freaked out, so I went to talk to Mom and Dad, but they wouldn't listen to me. I went back to sleep, but felt a warm hand touch my forehead. I was scared, so I just pulled the blanket over my head and closed my eyes tight. The next morning, I talked to Grandma and told her about it. She told me that it must be her late daughter's dead son who died at age 17 of a fever a long time ago. She told me not to be scared because he wouldn't do any harm to me. So even if she said not to be scared, I was still scared. Ever since I told Grandma about it, she would tell me stories about the time when he was still alive and that he was a nice man. For some time, a few weird things happened, but I just ignored them or forced myself to sleep. On our leave, we waved goodbye to Grandma and the others. When we got in the car, I stared into the house from the corner of my eye. I saw a man by the window waving by. I turned to look, but no one was there. I then noticed that the man was from the room I was staying in. I was scared, but I was glad that we left because I didn't know what might happen if I stayed a little longer there. So many thanks to those who stayed with us until the end of the story. Tell me what kind of story you want to hear next. If you tell me in the comments which country you are watching from, I will present some real ghost stories of that country for you.